Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1927 at 6 a.m. It would be a bloody day at Folsom State Prison. Inmates would obtain firearms by smuggling them in through visitors. They would attempt to take over the prison, a recipe for disaster. Over 1,400 people would end up being involved. For the first time ever, tanks would be called to stop a prison riot. According to the Sacramento Bee, thousands of rounds of ammunition were fired. However, but acting under orders from the prison board and Warden Smith, none of the besiegers opened fire until after the convicts had opened the battle. 1 guard and 7 inmates would end up dead. The 7 armed inmates would lay down their arms. This would be just one of many violent incidents at Folsom State Prison. We're going to be taking a deep dive into the unrest and violence at Folsom State Prison, one of the earliest maximum security prisons in the United States. Then take a look at some of the executed inmates and infamous offenders. First, we'll briefly look at the surrounding area, history, and stats for the prison. Let's continue our California State Prison series. This is California's second oldest prison, just behind San Quentin. It is located just northwest of the state capital of California, Sacramento. Folsom is a city of 80,954 people, characterized by long, hot, and dry summers with cool, rainy winters. The city is named after Joseph Libby Folsom, a U.S. Army officer and land investor in the early days of California's statehood. While the prison and California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is a large employer for the city, the largest employer is Intel Corporation, which has a large research and development campus. The current layout of the prison consists of 5 housing units, with a large granite wall surrounding the prison. The recreation yard sits in the center of the prison. Next to Folsom State Prison is California State Prison, Sacramento, also known as New Folsom. Folsom Women's Facility sits further to the east. In typical prison fashion, California bartered with the owners of the land, the Livermore family, to obtain the land for the prison. The Livermores sold the land in exchange for prison labor at Folsom. In 1878, funds for the prison were appropriated for the construction of the prison, although planning for it would begin over a decade earlier. It would accept its first inmates from San Quentin State Prison in 1880, and for a time was considered a branch facility of San Quentin. At the time of accepting its first inmates, the warden would say, out of over 200 men confined here, less than 20 are what might be termed hardened criminals or desperate men. The remainder are men who have foolishly acted and stumbled into doing wrong. Seems like not much has changed from today. The prison is located on the banks of the American River and just south of the Folsom Lake, which is a dammed, man-made body of water used to supply electricity and water to the area. Folsom would hold another first: electricity. Due to its proximity to the hydroelectric plant, the original capacity of the prison was 1,800 inmates. It has held anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 offenders throughout its history. Currently, the prison mainly holds medium security level 2 offenders. Issues would no doubt begin early at the prison. In 1903, an inmate high on opium would attempt to escape from the prison, but would be shot dead by the guards. In September 1937, Warden Clarence Larkin would be stabbed 12 times and killed during a prison break. An officer was also stabbed and succumbed to his wounds. 2 inmates were also killed, shot by officers in the nearby towers. The 5 remaining men were all convicted of first-degree murder and would meet their death in the state's new gas chamber at San Quentin. The violence at the prison peaked in the 1970s and 1980s. The violence here led to the construction of California's Supermax prison, Pelican Bay. Probably the most notable escape from the facility occurred in June 1987. Murderer Glenn Godwin used a hacksaw to cut through the fence, then escaped into a storm drain and crawled 750 feet to the American River. He then took a raft and floated down the river to freedom. His story wouldn't end here. Godwin was arrested in Mexico on drug-related charges, but would also escape from there. He was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives until May 2016, when he was removed as interest in the case had dwindled. On July 13, 1988, 3 inmates were shot in different incidents at the prison. At 8:50 a.m., 1 inmate ran towards another inmate with a shank. At 12:50 p.m., another inmate was shot in the thigh after failing to stop his attack on another offender. and at 6:35 p.m., an offender pursuing another inmate was shot. This was quite a busy day for staff. In 2010, 7 inmates were injured after correctional officers opened fire during a riot. The incident involved over 200 offenders, with 5 suffering gunshot wounds. Before we move on to the violence at the prison that is still occurring, hit that like button and subscribe so I know you like the content I'm creating. In 2019, inmates Joshua Dunn and Stephen Dunkhurst were seen attacking an inmate in a general population yard. The inmate was pronounced dead, but was not named at the time. October 29, 2020, at 9:05 a.m. Another riot would break out at the prison. 20 inmates were involved, and staff used chemical agents to stop the fight that had broke out in the prison yard. 5 inmates were injured. Along with San Quentin, executions were conducted at the prison from 1885 to 1937. Let's take a step back into the stories of some of those men. Martin McKean, aka George Putman, was executed at Folsom State Prison in 1900. This is a story almost too strange to be true. McKean received the death penalty for the murder of his cellmate, John Showers. He claimed to have avenged a friend, Abe Majors, who he met in prison. Abe's father was also hanged years earlier for a crime that he claimed he was innocent of. Showers confessed to McKean that he was in fact the murderer, not Abe's father, not knowing the connection between McKean and Abe. McKean would kill Showers for his confession. McKean was the 13th man to be hung at Folsom. One of Folsom's early famed inmates and executed individuals was Adolph Weber, a man convicted of murdering his family. He was executed by hanging at the prison in 1906. Weber directly affected future inheritance laws in California following his death. At the time, there was no laws against someone receiving the inheritance of their murder victim. Weber inherited, in today's money, $2 million from his father. Prior to his execution, Weber would write from Folsom State Prison, "Dear Sir, my life is so painful that I long for death. Nothing which I am connected to prospers. Nothing ever gives me pleasure. There is no one who is interested in me." Another inmate executed at the prison was David Fountain, a man convicted of murdering a 10-year-old girl in the basement of a church. He would mount the gallows at 10 a.m. on September 10, 1915, and just 13 minutes later, he would be pronounced dead by a prison doctor. The Sacramento Bee noted, "Nobody has asked for the privilege of giving Fountain a private burial. Apparently, the fiendish murderer of the 10-year-old girl has no friends." Fountain was buried in the prison cemetery, and at the time was nothing more than a number. Following the execution, the state changed its public execution policy. At the time, people would request invitations from the warden, and citizens from all over the state would attend. The warden said of the change, "The death chamber will no longer be used as a curiosity shop." In total, 92 men would meet the rope at Folsom. On my other channel, Chasing Killers, I take a look at individuals on death row, past and present. If that's something that interests you, click the link above to check that out. Let's fast forward a bit and take a look at some of the more infamous recent inmates at the prison. Thor Christensen was a serial killer convicted of the murders of 4 women in the late 1970s. He was from Denmark and immigrated to the US as a child. Christensen wouldn't be in prison long because he was stabbed in the yard at Folsom State Prison by an unknown assailant. Famed musician Rick James was incarcerated at Folsom State Prison in the 1990s for holding a woman hostage and forcing her to do sexual things to him and his girlfriend. He received a 5-year sentence, but would only spend just over 2 years at Folsom. He was released on August 21st, 1996. You can't mention Folsom State Prison without the name Johnny Cash. Cash's famous song, Folsom Prison Blues, narrated a fictional account of an incarcerated individual. 10 years after releasing the song, Cash would perform it at Folsom State Prison. But 2 years later, in 1968, he would return and record the classic album, At Folsom Prison. Cash would call the inmates there the most enthusiastic audience I ever played. The album would stay on the music charts for 122 weeks. Several classic movies have been filmed at Folsom, including several scenes in American Me, Straight Time with Dustin Hoffman, and Riot in Cell Block 11. This was a Chasing Crime profile of Folsom State Prison. Drop your thoughts on this prison in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.